Diana Jungeus, and I'm the executive director of Los Angeles Press Club. It's nice to see a few new faces here tonight, and this is a discussion that we really, really need to hold, because there has been many recent attacks on free speech, and that's why we decided to do this debate. And I'm sad to see that we don't have a full house, so that's how important this is for our members, right? But I'm so glad that you're all here, and we have a change of moderator, so it's Jill Stewart, acting editor of LA Weekly and our former president of LA Press Club. And I think Jill can take it from here.
Thank you. I was going to say I would have dressed up, but I didn't have time to get back because of the Suge Knight news, and we were doing news at the LA Weekly, but then I saw that all the other people are also wearing jeans, so I feel super dressy. Anyway, I would like to introduce these wonderful gentlemen who are up here with me tonight. At the very end, we have the LA-based French journalist and author, Guillaume Serina. And you have the shortest description here. It just says LA-based French journalist and author.
That's good enough. That's good enough.
Good enough. Okay, no, we'll get back to that. We'll make him just explain more in a little bit. And then we have Salam Al-Marayati. He's the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and some of you are aware this group works for the civil rights of American Muslims, but also for the integration of Islam into American pluralism. So that's kind of a heady thing and a tough job, I'm sure.
Right. Keeps us busy.
Keeps you busy. Surprise guest in the middle, David Horsey, the cartoonist for the LA Times. Very nice to see you. Everybody is a big fan, I'm sure. And lastly, next to me is Patrick Chappatte, and he is the famous Pakistan-born Lebanese-Swiss cartoonist. And you're simply known as Chappatte. You don't go by Patrick.
Yeah, Chappatte.
Chappatte, right. Okay. He draws a twice-weekly cartoon in the opinion section of the International New York Times. And over the years, he has collaborated with editorial cartoonists in conflict-ridden countries with the goal of promoting dialogue through cartooning, which is pretty great. In 2011, he won the Overseas Press Club of America's Thomas Nast Award for Best Cartoons on International Affairs, the first non-American to win the prize, which is very, very big.
And David only won the Pulitzer twice, right? Is that right?
Okay, I don't have a bio on you. I think I'll start out. What I'm going to do is ask a few questions, kind of casually, and each of you please respond, and then I'm going to have you each ask a question of each other, if you don't mind, and then we're going to throw it open to the audience after a little while. Is that all right with you guys? Okay. Guillaume, has there been a chilling of the media since the disaster in Paris? Is it already having an effect on the media at large?
I think it's too soon to tell. It's still quite emotional in Paris right now. I wasn't there, I'm based here. It was emotional for us here. There is a new law being in discussion currently in the French Parliament. It's mainly about economics growth, but there was a part in it about not protecting enough the sources of some financial scandals. So all the journalist class, if I may say, since a few days stood up and saying, look, we're after Charlie. If we want to stay Charlie, like we said, Je suis Charlie, we need to stand up against this project. You know, we need our protection, our sources protected. And today they did back up. But you see, it's extremely sensitive right now. The Charlie Hebdo team is currently trying to make a second issue after the murders. And people in our profession, everybody I talk to is still quite affected, really. So it's a little too soon, I think, to see how all of that is going to evolve.
David, in the United States, we're removed from all of this. We're at a better comfort level than the French, who are in the middle of it. And so we should be behaving maybe a little bit more, I would say courageously maybe. Why did the New York Times and other major media, some published the cartoons, why did some major media who have plenty of potential security if they need it, what were they thinking in your opinion?
Well, I think it had less to do with security than the long-standing nature of American media of being, well, as a cartoonist I've experienced this, and every political cartoonist in America has, that you're working for what everyone is classically called family newspapers. These are newspapers that they feel part of their mission is to be careful about images, and that's why a lot of American editorial cartoonists over the years have been either fired or censored, or it's always not because of their, well, not always, but it's often not their political views, it's that you said something that just didn't fit into that family newspaper thing. And the way that works out, especially in recent decades, is major media generally want to show a real sensitivity to the various communities in our country. So I think not publishing the image from Charlie Hebdo of Mohammed had less to do with fear than what I think the New York Times and others said. We never show these images of anybody in any circumstance. Now,
but surely they publish offensive cartoons on a regular basis.
Not offensive cartoons that are racially offensive or very religiously offensive. No, that's
just politically offensive, I guess.
There's no equivalent of Charlie Hebdo in the United States. We were talking about this earlier, that what's a little different about American cartoonists, just as an example of what we're talking about, is that political cartoonists have been part of the establishment for a long, long time, part of editorial boards inside the newspaper. I think to some extent in Europe, they tended to be sort of freelancers or artists or working for smaller newspapers. And so you're inside there's kind of a good thing about this is you're part of the machine, the establishment, but it is really, there have been limits in general for most cartoonists to how far you can go with images, and offensive images are pretty darn rare.
I think you're giving American media a pass in many ways, because I find a lot of, David Broder, one of the great reporters for the Washington Post, gave a talk one day, and he said, the problem with our First Amendment is not just the issue to make sure that there's separation of church and state, but also the issue of freedom of the press means that the press does not represent the state. And most of the reporting when it comes to the Muslim world that you find in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the LA Times, is pretty much coming from the US government standpoint. The Iraq War is a perfect example. The Iraq War was all about how reporters can get embedded with the troops so they can give you information of how Americans are fighting in Iraq. Yet, we never knew how many Iraqis were killed. It was pretty much a sanitized war, because all we saw was, from the standpoint of a pilot looking down and he's bombing something, you don't see human beings being killed. So we never got the true story on the Iraq War, neither Gulf War I nor Gulf War II. And the whole notion that the government was able to get away with this lie that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, and still a lot of Americans believe that. I think that's the responsibility of the press, to push back against the government. The press represents the people, not the government narrative.
But it doesn't explain why the Washington Post did publish the cartoons, and a number of newspapers that thought it was time for the American media to make a stand on the issue of terrorism that could come to our shores or any other shores at any time, and that is highly effective in part because people don't respond in a strong way back as a group. And am I presaging something you were going to say?
No, I think it's also very cultural. This country has become so politically correct that it's really hard even to have a discussion without, not being scared of offending someone or that group or that particular community. Maybe we can talk about the movie The Interview as well. I think that was part of the topic tonight. But I think for that, the Washington Post was right, I think, to do so, because not to show how provocative it was, but it's just part of the information. The reader needs to know why these guys were shot, right? I think the readers want that, especially from the Washington Post or the New York Times didn't do so, and I think it's too bad. But this, also the sense of humor it's cultural, and the second degree of these cartoons in Charlie Hebdo, none of these cartoons are first degree. You have really, if you take a cartoon that was published a couple of weeks before the tragic event, you had the French Attorney General, Minister, Secretary of Justice, who's I was about to say African American, who's
African French.
a black woman from French Guyana. She was cartooned as a monkey. Here, everybody had talked about it and showed it. It's like, wow, that's so racist. No, you need to know the context. They portrayed it that way because the Front National, the far right, you had some of their elected officials throwing bananas at her at some public rallies. So of course it's just to provoke, but it's to denounce. And I feel here the second degree, that kind of thing, and the politically correctness is different. And I think newspapers in that particular issue struggled with that cultural thing.
So we're learning something about the
Shouting
French
it.
tonight.
Yeah, they're very
Very good.
subtle, very subtle. But I've been living in Los Angeles since the summer, so I've become very much politically correct with time. And I would say that I have no problem, plus it's my employer, I have no problem with actually the New York Times not printing the front page. And I think freedom of speech is not, you don't have to endorse the speech that you want to defend. You don't have, if the policy of the Times has been so far not to show any picture of Muhammad, even when talking about the controversy, fine. And if my practice has been, I never drew Muhammad before. I didn't need to draw the Prophet to tackle, extremism, jihadism, integration of Muslims, and all those issues. I don't need to invite the figure of Muhammad to that. Then what happened after, first in 2005, after the Danish cartoons, and then a few weeks ago, people would come and tell you, so, are you going to draw Muhammad? Are you going to, are you going to stand for freedoms? This is childish. This is juvenile, I mean. And the whole debate for 10 years has been like that. It's at the same time childish and murderous. And we need to step out of that loop. It's a vicious circle.
Obviously, as a Muslim and an American Muslim, there's so many angles that we have to deal with on this issue. I just wanted to, I know this is known, but in stories like this, obviously Islam is put in a under the microscope and sort of caged up by the terrorists. And very few people will remember, they may have read it at first, that one of the first people who was killed was a person named Ahmed, who was the security for the site where the journalists were. And a person who also protected Jews when the terrorists attacked the kosher deli was another Muslim. And the same was in 9/11. There were Muslims in those Twin Towers. And so anytime that we meet people who discuss these issues, they always put Islam on one side, as if the terrorists have already won by hijacking our faith. And so it's always a struggle for us to explain our narrative, which, when you think about it, is the counter-narrative that will be, hopefully, if we're talking about a market of ideas, those ideas from the mainstream, moderate people who defend these values, who defend these rights, as Muslims, as people who believe is part of our faith. I mean, Islamic civilization didn't happen because of ideologies like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Islamic civilization was founded on the basis of freedom. We believe that God created humanity to be free, and that religion is supposed to secure that freedom. Any religion that does not secure freedom or justice is not religion. It's an industry, it's an exploitation, it's something else. But true religion is that which defends what God created us for, and that is to be free and to live freely on this earth. We believe when we say La ilaha illallah, there is no God but one God. It is our cry for freedom and liberation against anyone that is trying to impose their views on us or hold us down or try to get us to submit to them over God. So this idea of Islam to us is liberation, is freedom. The Quran documents insults against the Prophet. And there is not a single situation where the Prophet told his people go and do any harm to somebody who insulted him. In fact, there are stories upon stories of perseverance, of forgiveness, of compassion of our Prophet when it came to people insulting him. Those 2 or 3 or whatever terrorists, they're the ones who make the news.
And then I think we see the media step forward and say, where are all the moderate Muslims?
And then they say, where are they? If, you know, they're there. It doesn't take that much to find them, to do an internet search. The President of the United States cited Sheikh bin Baya. He cited a UK group in his speech against ISIS. And the reality is, those are the people that are going to be the ones that will be the weapon of faith against ideological extremism.
What's the role for artists, creative people, cartoonists, those in the media? What is the role for bringing out the topics that we're hearing about here?
The media has to decide to go beyond the easy story. Yeah, I mean, it's the nature of news that you're going to cover the house that's on fire, not the houses that aren't on fire. But at some point, you've got to say, part of this dramatic, dangerous phenomenon in the world is letting people know that, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, not all Muslims are like that, blah, blah, blah. You need more than that. You need to go out and talk to find the people in the communities and you know, make it a project, basically. I mean, everyone from CNN to the LA Times to anyone else does special work that gets beyond headlines. Most people don't appreciate the diversity of the Muslim community worldwide. And even if people acknowledge, well, yeah, most Muslims aren't violent, there's still this sort of sense that, well, they still believe the same crazy things, which is not entirely true. It's a very diverse faith, and somebody needs to tackle that, and it should be major news organizations.
Well, somebody called it the vicious, dark brilliance of terrorism because it does work. Chappatte, what can the media do? What should the media do next?
How many people in your faith or your constituency would share because what you said about people having the right to even offend and insult Muhammad is not something I've heard a lot.
No, of course. I mean, if somebody attacks my prophet, of course I'm offended. I'm not going to cheer.
Are you offended by the Muhammad cartoons that maybe you saw?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're intended to be offensive. I mean, they're intended to provoke. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's my job to say, you know, whether it's good or bad. Of course, for a Muslim, for a Jew, if you attack Israel, it's considered anti-Semitic because Israel is a central part of the identity. So, for many Jews, for Muslims, the central part of their identity is the Prophet and the Quran. So, you know, you shouldn't expect Muslims to like it, is what I'm trying to say. And there's a double standard too. because there are things that the media does not report, does not cover, because it's considered a red line. And even in Europe, there are laws that say you can't say certain things. So what Muslims there feel is the double standard, that there's a punishment if you say certain things. You deny the Holocaust, you deny the Armenian genocide, you just can't do that. But they feel that when it comes to the Prophet and the Quran, it's fair game. And it's not just fair game, it is attacking their identity. So that explains why they're offended, why we're offended.
And that's interesting.
But that's different from whether you have the right to do it or not. That's my point. Do you have the right to do it? Of course you do, because freedom is more important than whether you offend me or not. People should have the freedom and not be intimidated and fear doing something that there will be a punishment to that.
Do you feel that's quite a progressive position
This is classical.
in the Muslim
This is
community?
classical. I'm talking classical Islamic law. There are 5 goals in classical Islamic law: to protect life, to protect the right of the mind, which is freedom of expression, to protect the right of religion, to choose whatever religion you want, to protect the right of property, and to protect inheritance and the right of progeny.
What you said about the double standard, I think that's interesting. We need to talk about it. And about what the media could do more, maybe, because there is both of that. There are laws in France, for example, the Loi sur la Presse, which apply to, Jews, Muslims, whoever, and Christians. You can sue Charlie Hebdo. They were sued for their cartoons. You can sue any newspaper or media people on the basis of the insult or degrading a religion for reason of religion, race, and others. So it doesn't say Jews, it says any religion. Then you have that in law. It's the law. Then you have laws that apply to genocide. But let me say that's something different. We don't have a law on the figure of Jesus or God. Genocide is considered, another category. So you have the Armenian genocide, and you used to have the Holocaust. Then you have the practice of the media and of the elite, of the establishment, especially in France. And you can wonder, it's an unsettling question, if are we fair in the way we apply freedom of speech? And one thing that was a bit unsettling again about Charlie Hebdo, that very newspaper, when they had their former editor, Philippe Val, he fired Cine, one of their cartoonists, because he made comments that were judged anti-Semitic. So he fired the guy.
Right.
And then, and that was after the Danish cartoons controversy. But they kept on publishing cartoons that were seen as very offensive by Muslim communities or part of them. So people could have the feeling that there was a double standard. And I think that the media, to answer your question, that's very easy. I'm back to you. The media
my gosh, thank you.
could do, at least in France, a better job.
So you're saying
many
France
things.
in particular has a special problem that maybe is not nearly the situation in the United States.
We can question the issue of fairness in
Guillaume,
the way we
please.
treat.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
And maybe it's good to be back a little in history about the laws. I try not to be too boring about the laws and the history of Charlie Hebdo and satire in newspapers in France. Because maybe there was this double standard, or people thought they went too far on Muslims. But Charlie Hebdo was or is hammering everybody. Left, right, especially far right. So I heard on KCRW saying that these were racist cartoons. No, they were fighting against racism. And actually, when they got killed, they were in a meeting to do a special issue about racism. I've seen very provocative cartoons against the Pope, against the Jewish settlers in Israel, about all the extremists, but it's a very long tradition. You have to go back to the Middle Ages to see the Joker with the king, or La Fontaine was criticizing Louis XIV. It's an extremely long French tradition, And the ancestor of Charlie Hebdo, for example, was called Harakiri. Harakiri was censored by De Gaulle. De Gaulle hated Harakiri. Harakiri went after De Gaulle every single week, and they were censored. So they bought their freedom in a very high price.
They say they created the name Charlie Hebdo because of Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah, that's true. I heard it. I heard that. I think it's true. So they were really hammering everybody. Now that being said, about what you said and what Patrick said, there is no Muslim community in France, and that's hard to explain to an American audience. They're French at first. Then you have French Jews, French Muslims, French Christians. But the common link to all of us is being French. So it was a little disturbing to hear everybody call for moderate Muslims to stand up after what happened, because they didn't feel even concerned. It was not their religion. I mean, like you said, the terrorists put Islam in a cage, and that's what the media show. But they forced themselves to do so. So thousands of them came down in the streets saying, with signs, I'm a Muslim, and I'm French, and I'm Charlie. You even had imams from Bordeaux or many different cities saying, look, that's not us. But it's a little disturbing, I think, that we are asking, let's say, the old French, or let's say the government, to ask them to stand up against terror, of course, like everybody else, but also because since many decades, they've been the first victims of racism in France, of ghettoization. They've been asked not to wear, veil in French schools. So they have been ostracized, and now we're going after them to say, hey, come on, prove us that you're real French. So I wanted to point that because I think it's a part of the debate.
How's the French media handling that? Are the French media, is there a mix of coverage where you get some of that reality from the French media?
I don't know. It's, 10 years ago, I was a young producer for CNN in Paris, for Jim Biederman in Paris. And we did a story on French Muslims going to Mecca for the Hajj. We were the first one to do that in France. French TV were not covering that. After that, they did a little bit. So I don't know how the French media are going to react. Unfortunately, you already see some anti-Muslim acts against mosques or insults. You had already many arrestations and people being detained because of that since what happened 3 weeks ago. We're going to see as well in the next election, this spring, regional election, if the far right is going to go higher, which is a probability. So we'll see how the media will play with all that weird climate. So I don't know how to answer to that. And just one very quick last point, if I may, about the laws. There's no real translation for secularism. We call it laïcité in France. It's a law from 1905 that really separates strictly churches, and I put the plural, and the state. That's why French laws forbid Muslim women to come to school with a veil. Because when you're in a public place, everybody is equal. That's the equality, coming from the French Revolution.
It's like sacred against sacred. It's a vicious circle right now. It's as if the whole or all democracy and freedom of speech resided on the figure of the Prophet Muhammad, which is not even in my religion, for example, and as if that same figure had become the symbol of so many other things: frustration, social demands, political demands for not only Muslims but countries. And so why don't we just put aside the figure of Muhammad? I'm telling my fellow cartoonists, let's not draw him. I would advise Charlie not to draw him.
I learned early on that cartoons are filled with stereotypes, and I would draw something, I'd be wanting to say this thing over here, but some image that I would put in my cartoon would set off somebody in the black community or some other community, and I realized I just needed to be more, I needed to think beyond cliches, because people weren't understanding what I was saying. So I got more specific on who I was drawing, what I was drawing. If I was commenting on Jesse Jackson, I made sure it looked like Jesse Jackson. So it wasn't some comment about black Americans, it's a comment about him. So I agree with what you're saying, that get rid of all the symbols. And another symbol that was sort of shorthand for every American cartoonist for a long time was, if you're commenting on Arabs, everybody looked like a Saudi sheikh. Yeah, and someone brought that up with me. I thought, well, that's true. Actually, most people in the Arab world dress like we do. So why am I using this cliche? There have been periods of history where Islamic artists depicted Muhammad.
That's true.
So what is real now, and is this just a rallying point that radicals have grabbed onto, or what? Just how big is the sensitivity?
The main reason why Muslims do not have images of Muhammad is we don't believe in any kind of imagery of the prophets. We don't want a racialized depiction of the prophet. Like, is he white, or is he brown, or is he, and it has a lot to do with how Jesus is racialized. It has become a rallying cry for many people that look, they're it's not just depictions, it's caricatures. That's what it's become. Now, having said that, one of the first events we had at MPAC was a dinner honoring Paul Conrad. And Paul Conrad, the great cartoonist, to us represented our voice in cartoons, really lampooning the establishment and the government. I think that political cartoonists are the only real free-style, free-thinking people that we have left in journalism.
Even if we disagree with Charlie, I do think it's important that they had the right to do so. Let's underline that. Because by going so far in provocation, they're actually protecting the others, us, more moderates cartoonists, or just journalists. I do think going that far and being allowed to do so by law protects freedom of speech in general for everybody.
This idea of punishing people for apostasy or punishing people for blasphemy is not found in the Quran. It actually documents people who blasphemed the prophet, who blasphemed God, who blasphemed the Quran. So, if anything, the Quran is silent on that issue, and it became more of a political stand. And in fact, in Pakistan, blasphemy law, and in India, blasphemy law was actually brought to the region by the British because it was against the law to insult the Queen and the Church of England at that time. So there's, if we want to do real journalism, we should get into some analysis of where these blasphemy laws came from. Of course, how it's politicized by radicals, but really what are the true roots of it, because it's not founded in the Quran.
The worst, outrageous, horrible, nasty illustrations against religion and really offensive images that I have seen are from 16th, 17th century Protestant reformers against the church and the Pope. And they are depicted in ways that I cannot even tell here.
Right.
So those...
Yeah.
No, I can't.
Everybody?
I can't, because I would shock myself. But
Right.
And those images were not the ancestors of political cartoons. They were the ancestors of propaganda,
Right.
which is a different
Right.
thing.
So we're really very much behind the times, because they started all this in 1600 or so.
I belong to an organization called the American Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, and we were a party in that case, defending Falwell, not because he's such a, not Falwell, sorry, Hustler.
Larry Flint.
Larry Flint.
Larry
Yeah.
Flint.
Flint. I'm not sure. And most of us was like, we're holding our nose, God, Larry Flint? But it was the principle that, yeah, this was satire, and it was disgusting and stupid, but, well, maybe not, I don't know, depending on your opinion. But that was the point. It was opinion. It was satire. And luckily, in this country, as far as I know, there's never been a successful lawsuit against any political cartoonist.
So why are college students less supportive of the First Amendment than any young people in my lifetime? Why are today's college students so willing to say, yeah, let's make some rules against saying unfriendly things? What's going on with college students in America?
Yeah, let's ask them.
Well,
Where are they?
Here's my guess. Having raised a couple of college students. And it comes from a very good place. This is a generation that has been raised because of the long history of racism and violence against different ethnic groups in this country, raised to be respectful of everybody. You know, it's the diversity is good. Everybody has their right to their idea. That's a very positive thing, but sort of an underlying ethic of that is, well, therefore, let's not, you know, they're told, you don't pick on people, don't insult people, don't judge them because of their philosophy or religion or whatever. And so I actually think that is what it is. It's a very sensitive bunch of young people who are open to the world more than any other group of Americans in history, probably, but part of that is, well, yeah, we shouldn't insult people. People shouldn't be able to say nasty things about this group or that group.
The students that I met, that was at USC, and it was actually, the comments I mentioned came up after the professor specifically asked for comments from students from Asia and from different parts of the world, because the one who had been speaking were mostly young white American guys. And that where came the diverging comments. And this is an illustration of what's maybe going on. I think that we are maybe having the first conflict of globalization, and it's a cultural one. Is that we're not, if you look at the planet, we're not that many sharing what we're all sharing today, the same ideas and same opinions on freedom of speech. If you take the Western world and the US and a few other places, think of the rest of the world and the position of China or the point of view coming from India or from lots of places, and not to mention the Arab world, is very different.
I have two college kids as well, going through, one is marine biology and the other one is political science. And you know, I find them and their friends to be wholesome. They're just good-natured kids. They were not as naughty as I was when I was in high school and college. But at the same time, I just don't get that same sense that, you know, when we were growing up, that daringness to challenge authority. And we don't reinforce our kids to challenge authority as a society. You know, in the 60s, were kids arrested and convicted for protesting the Attorney General? No. Even Attorney General Eric Holder says, we used to go and hold up, you know, have sit-ins in buildings and hold it up. We didn't get arrested. So I think society is punishing kids that want to challenge authority. And I think that's another factor for this lack of speaking out. They're just afraid.
Guillaume, may I ask you for a final thought here?
Fuck authority. Fuck authority. Let's be responsible. Let's investigate. Let's be watchdogs. Let's be citizens.
Let's be the real press.
Let's be citizens and the real press. And you were mentioning your kids. You know, go vote. This country don't vote. Almost, you know, if you take European standards. That's the first thing to do. That's it.
So am I going to quote you correctly? Fuck authority and go vote.
Yes. I'm full of contradiction as well.
Thank you guys so much. Such smart guys. Thank you very, very much.